The Toronto Raptors are now expected to land Zach Edey in this year's NBA draft. Zach Edey being the Canadian-born 7'4" college basketball phenom that turned a lot of heads over his entire career at Purdue, not just with his size, but extremely effective play. Now, there are some questions about how his dominance will translate over into the NBA, and even with those question marks, he has turned a lot of doubters into believers at this year's NBA draft combine, and because of it, he's gone from a player that was projected to be around a mid-second round pick for a long time over the course of this season, in combination with his NCAA tournament and draft combine performance, is now projected to land right where the Toronto Raptors are drafting at number 19 overall. If you're not familiar, the Toronto Raptors lost their first round draft pick in this year's NBA draft, going to the San Antonio Spurs. However, we got the Pacers pick from the Indiana Pacers in that Pascal Siakam trade. So we are currently selecting number 19 overall, the first round of this year's NBA draft, and that's where Zach Edey is currently shot up to because of his performance as of late, impressing scouts and what he's been able to do. Well, there's a couple things about Zach Edey that didn't need any selling to NBA sort of scouts or GMs or anything along those lines, because he's a dude that averaged 25 points per game in college, 12 rebounds, 2 assists, shot 62% from the field, remarkably efficient, was essentially an automatic bucket when he caught the ball underneath the rim or just within 5 to 7 feet of the basket. No one could guard him, obviously, in college basketball, especially. His size, his frame, and his excellent touch around the basket really just was an unstoppable force for Purdue and allowed them to go on a deep sort of NCAA tournament run. But there were a couple question marks about Zach Edey's game. One, was he mobile enough to sort of defend at the NBA level? Well, at the NBA draft combine, I made a video on this a few days ago. He is looking more and more mobile, more and more nimble. You don't want to accuse him of being as quick as an Immanuel Quickley or one of these types of guys, but certainly a dude that, for a 7'4" frame, is impressing a lot of people with his lateral sort of movements, as well as his jump shooting. And this is the big thing that scouts have been looking at and saying, hey, if he can stretch the floor a little bit, at least get a mid-range jump shot, that's going to be huge for his offensive upside in the NBA. And that's essentially what scouts have come out and said. This is the latest in terms of what they're saying. At the least, Zach Edey may have opened scouts' imaginations at the combine with his comfort level he demonstrated making jump shots during drills. And this is coming from Jonathan Wasserman, an NBA draft analyst for Bleacher Report. Basically, he went on to say that regardless, for a center who measures at just under 7'4" in socks with a near 7'11" wingspan, his touch and footwork have gotten sharp enough for scouts to picture a useful low post scorer and an offensive rebounder. Teams deeper in the front court will look elsewhere, and so will those who question how playable he will be defensively, especially in the playoffs. He'll be enticing for a lot of teams looking to add more size, physicality around the basket, as well as interior defense. And while the Toronto Raptors do have a current, interesting roster, lots of sort of scattered players, we're not going to pass up on a talent that could develop into a really, really nice fit, regardless of sort of the positional current state of the Toronto Raptors. I mean, we can look at it here now. Obviously, at the top, we have RJ Barrett, Scottie Barnes, Immanuel Quickley. Those are our core sort of players. But in that front court, we do have Jakob Poeltl as well as Kelly Olynyk. Now, Kelly Olynyk can play the 5, can play the 4, played a ton of 5 to close out the season for the Toronto Raptors. But obviously, a lot of that had to do with just he was the only big man available. He's a guy that can play the 5, but is more of a stretch sort of creator at that forward position. But the question is with Jakob Poeltl and his sort of future with this team. Does he fit this timeline? And all those question marks. But regardless what you think about the fit with Jakob Poeltl here on this team, if you think Zach Edey has that sort of potential to be a star center in the NBA, it doesn't make sense to sort of make moves right now in terms of fit. Jakob Poeltl has an extremely tradable contract. He's a guy that netted a first-round pick and 2 second-round picks just a season and a half ago. So his trade value is not going to go down, especially now that teams that could be interested in him would have more leverage in terms of, his ability to stay around with multiple years left on his contract. So, frankly, I'm not too worried about, obviously Jakob Poeltl is a great player, a guy that I wouldn't mind keeping around with this Toronto Raptors team, but Zach Edey especially can prove that he's going to make free throws and make shots, outside that paint, outside the key. If he's up there at number 19 and there's other players that just aren't available, then you gotta go with it. You gotta go with it, not just because he's Canadian, but for the potential upside. And even the Raptors assistant GM has spoken out about this recently in an interview. Basically, Dan Tolzman, assistant GM for the Toronto Raptors, said there are players where they might not fit into where the league is going, but if there's something that they're dominant in doing, whatever that skill is, it does seem like the league starts to follow suit. So again, they can't directly talk about draft picks and players and give out the sort of sauce in terms of who they're looking at. Dan Tolzman sort of alluded to the fact that, hey, just because he's not the craziest, most mobile player doesn't mean he's going to be completely written off the Toronto Raptors draft boards, and that's before we saw everything that sort of came out regarding the combine. So Zach Edey would be a really cool fit. This latest mock draft also had some updates on some other guys I know Toronto Raptors fans have been looking at. Kel'el Ware, he would not be available according to the latest mock drafts for the Toronto Raptors at the number 19th overall selection. Now, in a recent video, basically, they had him going number 31st overall. So the mock drafts are just all over the place here now at this point. So it might be tough to really gauge where players are going to land. But the 7'1" shot blocking, athletic jump shooting center, Kel'el Ware, doesn't seem like he'll be available, at least according to this mock draft. But another guy that I think if he's available, especially at the 31 overall selection, again, there's questions about his specific motor and things like that. Would be a nice steal at 31, but he's not even going to be there at 19 according to the latest mock drafts. And as well as Devin Williams, he's a guy that rebounding, gritty guard that put up close to 20 points per game, almost 9 rebounds for a small guard, just a hustler, just a dog. He was projected the guy that in the Tankathon sort of that website, they had him projecting going to the Toronto Raptors at that selection. Now, apparently he's supposed to go number 12 overall, so there's a wide range in terms of players that we can expect to land where the Toronto Raptors are selecting, but right now, the latest as is the snapshot projections, they have the Toronto Raptors landing Zach Edey with that pick. Now, if we compare Zach Edey to Kel'el Ware, those are the two bigs that I feel like have been most sort of rumored and named to go in the Toronto Raptors draft selection. There's been heated debates I've seen about who Raptors fans would rather see end up becoming a Toronto Raptor, because it feels like, especially the moves we made over the course of this year, building up, stockpiling on a ton of shooting guards, point guards, and heck, even small forwards. I mean, I'd be surprised if we don't go with a forward or a center in this year's NBA draft. I mean, I guess we're going to take the best talent available, but most eyes are on those positions where there's a little bit more positional need. I get both sides, because Kel'el Ware, there's the question marks about his motor. That's a big thing that you have to factor in. You want players that are come in and going to be motivated, because Zach Edey himself is a dude that is ready to rock. We hear his interviews, we hear his improvement. I mean, to the point where he was scoring 25 points per game, ended up leading his team to an NCAA tournament run. I mean, like, that's a guy, the mentality you're really going for, and is also 7'4", 300 pounds. I mean, why on earth would you not project that bad to at least be an offensive force out there in the NBA? No one in their right mind wouldn't, again. But Kel'el Ware is a guy that defensively blocks more shots than Zach Edey, at least in terms of mobility and stuff, coming in over on the weak side. Edey obviously has more size, so underneath the basket could, I don't want to say blocks more shots, but it's a bit more mobile, Kel'el Ware is, but Edey also has the size and it's a bit more of a solid frame underneath the basket. The real plus of Kel'el is straight up his jump shooting. He's a guy that's proven that he's an elite three-point shooter. But if Edey's, if what they're saying is true, if what these sort of draft scouts are saying out here at this point is true, that Zach Edey has opened up the minds of scouts because of his jump shooting at the draft combine, I think you go with Edey. I think you go with Edey in this debate and sort of let it play out. Go with the Canadian. It is what it is. It's number 19th overall selection, so there's risks with any players going at that range, but I don't know. I'd love to see Zach Edey in the Toronto Raptors. There's a lot of guys I'm falling in love with during this sort of draft range with these videos. But let me know what you guys think about the Raptors potentially drafting Zach Edey in the comment section down below. You guys have listening this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out.